Today in Baltimore, mourners are saying goodbye to Freddie Gray, the man who died after being taken into police custody 2 weeks ago. He'll be laid to rest tomorrow, but questions surrounding Gray's death of a spinal cord injury have the community there on edge. On Saturday, thousands of demonstrators demanded answers. What started as a peaceful protest got out of hand. Dozens were arrested. In another Maryland community, however, a protest march of a different nature, where people showed up at an event planned months ago to show police their support.
They're spit on, cursed at, rocks and bottles thrown at them.
Thank you for all that you do, and as my 4-year-old twin daughters say to their daddy every day, be safe.
Congressman Elijah Cummings, who represents Baltimore, says Saturday's demonstrations could have been more violent. He credits community leaders with keeping demonstrators' anger in check. The Coast Guard has found 2 bodies after a powerful storm capsized several sailboats that were racing off the coast of Alabama late Saturday night. Crews are still searching for 5 people believed to be missing. Not all of the missing people were participating in the Dauphin Island Regatta. It included more than 100 boats and 200 people. Crews are using boats and planes to search a portion of Mobile Bay. Family members are gathered on Dauphin Island waiting for updates. The long-term battle of a juror from a murder trial, pot problems, and paying to drive on US 36. Those are just a few of the stories that got you talking this week. Here's Kim Christensen with our 9 Listens report.
And all I did was what I thought was my civic duty.
She was on a jury that convicted a man of murder. Now a woman in Grand Junction is facing contempt charges for lying on her juror questionnaire. One comment, all this will do is deter people from doing their civic duty and serving on a jury. A large portion of people do what they can to get out of it now. If jurors can be sued, then less and less people will serve because they don't want that liability.
It could cost. And we look forward to hearing your comments every week. You can email them to us at kusa@9news.com. You can also call us or send us a message on Facebook. The theater shooting trial begins tomorrow. It's a process that's likely to last months, and to that end, we've carefully planned our coverage to avoid overwhelming you. When there are big developments, we'll provide updates here on TV. You can decide how much coverage you want to see, including gavel-to-gavel coverage on Channel 9.3, the Justice Network, and 9news.com. If you do want to follow along, we've just posted an article online from 9 News psychologist Dr. Max Wachtel, helping to explain Colorado's insanity laws.
All these definitions, these legal statutes, are what the jury is going to be having in mind when they're trying to decide whether the shooter is insane or sane. So if you're watching along at home, you're going to be able to follow along with those arguments a little bit better.
Opening statements are scheduled for tomorrow. State lawmakers have less than 2 weeks to get things done this session. That includes work on a bill driven by the shooting death of Claire Davis at Arapahoe High School. Legislators are considering allowing victims to sue schools for negligence when there's violence that results in either death or serious injury. The bill has cleared the Senate and has its first hearing in a House committee on Tuesday. The House and Senate are each giving final approval this week to rival proposals for reducing statewide student testing. They're still trying to find common ground on whether to require the tests in 9th grade, and whether to remove social studies tests completely or make them optional. And lawmakers are debating whether to ban red light and speed cameras. There are 2 bills being considered, including one that would prohibit their use completely. Their other bill would let local governments ask voters permission to use the cameras. This week, senators will also consider a GOP measure to make the killing of a fetus a homicide. In certain cases, the bill is in response to the attack on expectant mother Michelle Wilkins. She survived, her baby did not. Under current state law, prosecutors could not file murder charges. This proposal would change that, but Democrats argue it would interfere with abortion rights. Hollywood met the press in Washington Saturday night, marking the 101st White House Correspondents' Dinner. From Tara Lipinski and Johnny Weir to Ashley Judd and Bradley Cooper. A lot of faces you recognize turned the nation's capital into Tinseltown for a few hours. Saturday Night Live's Cecily Strong was definitely not afraid to throw some jabs at the president while touching on a hot-button issue.
Approval rating is at 48%. Not only that, your gray hair is at 85%. Your hair is so white now it can talk back to the police.
The commander-in-chief turned comedian-in-chief for the night drew some of the biggest laughs, aiming a few jokes at his former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and his old rival Donald Trump. He also touched on the trouble of the Secret Service, saying he'd finally found a foolproof way to keep people off his lawn. Well, crews in Summit County are adopting the Scout motto, "Be prepared." We'll show you what they're doing to make sure they're ready for wildfire season. Close to 700 people are feared dead after a boat carrying migrants from Libya's coast capsized in the Mediterranean Sea. A few dozen people survived the accident, and they say the 66-foot smuggler's boat was carrying as many as 700 people. If that's confirmed, it would be the single deadliest accident involving migrants in the Mediterranean on record. Tens of thousands of people are fleeing war and persecution in North Africa and the Middle East for Europe.
We've had 1.5 years now to talk about that and discuss that and plan for that. The EU and governments are all sort of starting to discuss that and saying it's unacceptable, we have to do something. But something needs to be done, it's clear.
28 people were rescued. So far, 24 bodies have been recovered. The search is on for a shooter who injured 3 people at a Delaware State University late last night. The victims were attending a school-sanctioned sorority and fraternity cookout. All 3 were taken to a hospital in Dover. And there was a second shooting later that night, several hours later, at an apartment complex just off campus. No one was hurt in that shooting, and police have not said if the incidents are related. They have encouraged students to stay inside while they search for a suspect. And 22 years ago today, the standoff at a cult compound in Waco, Texas, came to a deadly end. It started when the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms tried to execute search warrants against David Koresh. He was the leader of the branch of the Davidians. Gunfire broke out, starting a siege that did not end until 51 days later, when federal authorities initiated a tear gas attack. Fire broke out, killing 76 people inside the compound, including Koresh. Tomorrow marks 5 years since the BP Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. 11 men were killed and more than 3 million gallons of crude oil were released into the water. While several major companies have paid or are paying billions to resolve civil court cases, there are still criminal cases pending against 4 people facing various charges for what prosecutors describe as misconduct before and after oil started flowing into the Gulf. People in Pueblo were asked to stay inside today because of heavy smoke from a fire. Crews are using excavators to take apart 100-foot-high piles of scrap at American Iron and Metal. They say water alone will not put the fire out, and it could take days. The health department issued an advisory for the Salt Creek neighborhood. Residents are being told to keep windows and doors shut and to turn off ventilation systems. People with respiratory illnesses are encouraged to leave the area until the smoke is gone. Evacuation orders have been lifted near a wildfire in Southern California. The order, which covered about 200 homes, was canceled this morning. The fire started Saturday evening in the Prado Dam area of Chino, grew to about 300 acres today. At last check, it was 15% contained. Crews say the fire has been difficult to get to from the ground. About 800 firefighters from various agencies have been fighting the fire, and air support was called in overnight. Severe weather has pounded Texas this weekend, causing widespread power outages in the Dallas area, including Toyota Stadium, where a professional soccer game had to be delayed. All flights were grounded at nearby Dallas Love Field until the storm passed. And in Arlington, Texas, music lovers scrambled for cover after sudden heavy rain hit the Academy of Country Music motorcycle riding concert. The event was delayed for about 2 hours. Some of the biggest names in the business, Reba McEntire, Dierks Bentley, Luke Bryan, they all waited out the storm. The end is in sight for the 2015 state legislature. Lawmakers have until May 6 to finish up their work. Both chambers finished work on the $26 billion budget, and it's expected to land on the governor's desk this week. Even with time running out, lawmakers seem far from an agreement on how to reduce student standardized tests. Another batch of proposals goes before the House Education Committee Monday, including one that ratchets back required tests and a long-shot measure to end the state's participation in Common Core academic standards. A Republican senator is expected to unveil a $3.5 billion plan to issue transportation bonds over the next 20 years. The proposal reportedly includes upgrades to Interstates 25 and I-70, along with work on smaller highways and mass transit projects. Voters would have to sign off on the package, which has very little time to make it through the legislature before the session ends. The recent attack in Longmont that took the life of Michelle Wilkins' unborn baby quickly started a political debate. Republicans are upset that Colorado law does not allow for murder charges in the death of her unborn child. Democrats say a law that passed in 2013 places a, quote, serious enough penalty on this crime equivalent to some second-degree murders. Senate Republicans offered a personhood bill, but one that has exceptions designed to protect abortions. There are other ways of enabling murder charges in a case like this, like including a fetus as a type of victim in the state's homicide laws. On 9news.com, you can see the extended debate between politicians on opposite ends of this debate from this morning's Balance of Power. 9 News political reporter Brandon Ritterman wanted to know if there was room for compromise, changing the bill from a kind of personhood to fetal homicide.
Was fetal homicide. Is there anyone in the Democratic Party who would vote to that? I mean, he just sat here and said to your face that there's no way you would confer any extra legal status on an unborn child itself. Is that true?
And again, you can see this entire debate on 9news.com right now. Look for the link that says balance of power. A replica warship that carried France's Marquis de Lafayette to help American colonists in the Revolutionary War is headed for the United States. The tall ship named the Hermione set sail under a sky lit by fireworks last night. It's similar to the one Lafayette used to cross the Atlantic in 1780. His mission was to tell George Washington that France was sending troops to help in the American fight against the British. It took nearly 18 years and $27 million to build this ship. The frigate arrives in Yorktown, Virginia in June and will sail a 2-month tour of key locations in the American Revolution. And among the 400 monuments and parks and battlefields overseen by the National Park Service, there are big names like our Rocky Mountain National Park and, of course, Yellowstone. But then there are lesser-known sites tucked in corners of the country like Great Falls National Park in Virginia. In honor of National Parks Week, we're headed there to see how getting a park was a much different story in the 1870s.
There were a lot of people in Washington who had heard of the falls, but had never seen it. Now, these were ordinary people like you and me. They didn't own a carriage, they didn't own a horse. So wealthy people knew what this looked like. They visited it all the time. But before there was an easy way and a cheap way to get here, the common man really had to
McCarthy says the gates he was demonstrating are actually the same style designed by Leonardo da Vinci way back in 1485. There was a sketch of one of them in his books. And 20 years later, the gates he designed replaced all of the other inferior gates across medieval Europe. And a spring snowstorm and an emotional story emerging from a classroom. We're hearing your reaction to the week's biggest stories coming up.